In the early 1990s, the National Canadian Bar Association decided to strike a task force to look at gender equality issues within the legal profession. And the reason that they did that is because there were a number of law societies that did statistical surveys that determined that the attrition rate for women leaving the legal profession was significantly higher than it was for men, that women's wages were lower than men's, and that women were reporting that they weren't able to break through what they called a glass ceiling in the profession. And the CBA was extremely concerned about it and decided to fund a national task force to do a very large-scale analysis of the issues and to determine whether or not specific measures could be taken by the stakeholders in the profession in order to address a perceived systemic barriers to equality. And I'm going to say it's not just gender equality, but all forms of equality in the profession. So they asked Madam Justice Bertha Wilson, who was the first woman appointed to the Supreme Court of Canada, to chair that task force. Now, that was an incredible coup that they were able to get her to do that. And they appointed task force members from across Canada and from across different sectors of the profession. So there were a couple of members that were private practitioners. I was one of them. There were 2 judges. There was an academic. There was someone from Quebec. So it was representative, I think, of Canada, the Canadian legal profession, and most members of the stakeholders in the profession. We sat for 2 years, and I will say that when I started this, I had just had my 3rd child. So I had a 5-month-old baby when I got appointed to this. And we first of all had to figure out how to approach it, and we took a sort of a cross-section of the profession. So we analyzed the issues from the perspective of the judiciary, corporations, and private practice, and tried to break it down into different problem areas. And we had working groups in each province that consisted of, again, the same kind of cross-section of the profession that was represented on the task force. And we did a number of different additional surveys to make sure that we had enough data in order to do a careful analysis of the problem. And we then had conferences, hearings, and information sessions across Canada over the next 18 months to 2 years. And we ended up writing a report that was, in its fullness, 9 volumes. And we had, hundreds of recommendations. Those recommendations went to the National Canadian Bar Association, and they were debated by the membership, the executive, the council, it's called the council, over the course of about 2 years. And each provincial bar association, each provincial law society, the judiciary, all took the recommendations that were passed and that were aimed at them and tried to look at ways that they could effectively implement those changes into the profession. And I'm going to say that that was a time when there was lots of controversy about some of the recommendations, and some of the recommendations were easier to implement than others. One of the most controversial recommendations was a recommendation that there was a legal duty to accommodate women who had children within the profession, and that kind of accommodation might take the form of reduced targets in terms of billable hours during periods when women had responsibility for kids. That was a hotly debated recommendation. And in fact, my dear friend Justice Sheila Martin ended up writing an extensive paper supporting the legal duty to accommodate. And so there were many, many recommendations, and I think some were more successfully implemented than others. There were lots of people who supported the task force and the recommendations and moving them forward. And I would say that there were firm pockets of resistance to it. And to this day, I think that there's still room for change. But I will say that there's been significant change since the early 90s in terms of what the profession looks like and in terms of some of these problems. I would be fooling the profession or fooling myself to say that I thought that we were there in terms of true equality within the profession. And we're not there in terms of equality within society either.